Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 104, Q&A, and some miscellaneous updates. How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
I can hear you better now. We had a
Yeah.
late start here because microphones and technology troubleshooting issues. You know, there's all these extra things you have to know as a creator. It's not just that we want to talk about all the topics we're going to cover on your home lab today in a Q&A, which we have a lot of Q&A. We had some delays and changes because of me and Jay having vacations and such. There's a lot of questions on there, but then, we started a few minutes late because suddenly Jay's microphone wasn't Jay's microphone anymore.
I feel like one thing that every operating system just does a poor job. I don't care if you're on a Mac, Windows, Linux, I don't care. They all suck at this. And that is managing audio devices. Like we're not asking for much. We want to be able to set a default or primary input device without plugging in a webcam, for example, that we have no intent on using as a microphone. And then the operating system just decides that that's the new input device. And we should be able to like pin these things or put a score on them or have some kind of configuration. But I think every operating system needs to put some work into this because I've heard even non-creators complaining when they're trying to join a Zoom call and then they can't figure out which microphone it decided to choose that day. It just gets irritating.
Yeah, this is a common problem, and
Yep.
it's only because of you, Jay. You helped me sort out the Linux script that I have
Yep.
to force every time my computer boots, the things go out of order because I have many devices plugged in, and I have it forcing exactly which ones I want to make the priority. So, but yeah, why that's not a function, as you said, I could build a weight, like set a weight for each device in there. So if any of the developers who work with audio stuff are listening, there's a good feature request. I think
I
there's a
think
pull
so.
request for things like that.
Yep. And
Um,
I'll say as a little bit of a background, I have a video coming out, and we're on a new, I want to say format, which I'll mention in a minute. But I decided to recase my recording PC because I got the new Nebula case from System 76. So of course I put the guts of the computer in there. And because I didn't have every USB cable in the exact same port that they were in before I rebuilt the computer, then now the computer has to find its way again because now it's just confused because every USB port has a different device in it. Like it's just weird. Yeah.
hmm,
Computer stuff. Yeah, it's fun.
Computer stuff.
Yeah.
Me and Jay both have something we're going to start out with that's a little different, and
Yep.
we don't necessarily going to have this every show, but because I found some extra time to read a book I've been wanting to read, and I didn't have it pulled up. Jay's got one too, but
Yeah.
it's some tech book recommendations essentially. Mine
Yep.
is where wizards stay up late. The title, I kept saying when the wizards stay up late, but it's where the wizards stay up late, and it's the history of the founding of the internet. And boy, there's just a lot to unpack in that book. It was actually a pretty interesting read if you want to do a deep dive on the history of it. And you can learn what's true and what's not true. And I think the book starts out with some of that. There's a lot of myths of how it was this project or that project, the details of how those Honeywell systems got built, and the surprising nature of how little um, Honeywell customized them and how many things were shipped wrong. They were just not reliable systems. And it was really interesting. They're like, yeah, they crash sometimes, but no one leaves them up and running for very long. So they actually, all the engineering we take for granted for things like having a watchdog timer that automatically reloads a program in the hardware. There's just like some really neat stuff I learned that was all kind of invented out of the necessity of a constantly running network. Because before, computers were like, you compute data with them and then you turn them off. You don't leave these things on. And that's weird. So it's really, really interesting, all the little details I picked up out of that book. So I'll throw it out there as a pretty, if you're interested in the history of how the internet and a lot of this stuff started, all the people involved, it's a great read.
I'm going to recommend Once Upon Atari: How I Made History by Killing an Industry. That's going to be the book that I recommend. That's written by Howard Scott Warshaw. And if that name sounds familiar, if you look into the whole ET Atari fiasco with the whole development, it's a fun look into the behind the scenes from back then, and he also talks about how things are now. Goes back and forth between current day and then previous day, working at Atari, previous Atari employee, but it's just written so well, and it's hilarious. It just gives you insight into that time period. And the one thing I'll say about this book recommendation thing is it's always going to be um, geek culture, Homelab
Oh yeah.
culture, things that are going to be within Homelab. It's not always going to be a Homelab specific book, but it's going to be within the tech. Because we have to have something to read when we're watching all these progress bars that just take forever. I mean, it's either stare at that or read a book while you're waiting. I mean, you can get some reading in while you're, running your home lab. So it's a mutual benefit. But
Yeah,
yeah, Once Upon a Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry.
that is pretty cool. All right, now next thing I want to mention up is going to be uh, some errata updates, and
Mhm.
I don't really have much. I was going to talk about XCPNG, but I've summed that up in a couple other videos, and I'm going to probably do a longer one because there's been so many changes. So I will be doing a new, like, getting started with XCPNG and covering all of that because we've added so many features since I did my last getting started with it. It's a product that's really enhanced quite a bit, and it's obviously a popular virtualization platform in the home lab. But I will mention net data, which is just an awesome. Me and Jay both have
Mhm.
videos on net data. They've
Yep.
really not just done a facelift, they threw a few new features in there. Now they have the net data and the net data cloud, and they have the net data cloud where you can put all of your things together. But they added another feature, and I haven't explored this, and I was, springing it on Jay here if he has. They have a way you can locally push data from other nodes into another local node. Have you tested that at all?
No, I was hoping they would do that because I feel like there's a lot of TCP traffic, going in different directions, which isn't really a problem if it's not your data center. But as soon as you have all these net data things, in your local network, that's a lot of traffic. So it'd be cool to be able to route the traffic out a certain direction if, based on what you said, that kind of seems like what it does.
Yeah, so it's kind of neat, because a few people have asked about, like, well, I want to have all my nodes in one web view, but not have to use their cloud. And one of the ways you could do it is obviously is you could just iframe these in and build your own web interface for it. It's not hard to do because they're all just feeds, but
Mhm.
the fact that they have this whole consolidation, it's not something I play with to really see how it looks, but the concept is there, and I think that's pretty neat. It just came out with the latest one, but it's definitely a really cool system.
Someone was mentioning in the chat room about wishing there was a Windows agent. Isn't that something that they're working on? I thought there was some kind of news. I'm not saying it's ready, but I thought they were working on it.
There's somehow you can have it attached to Windows, but I don't know what all it gets out. The problem is it's such a Linux centric system. Um, it's just one of those things that I don't know how
Mm.
good they're going to be able to make it inside of Windows. Windows just does not work the same as Linux. It's just they're
True.
far off the base. And I don't know how much of a use case that's going to be. Like, so I don't know how good that would ever be. But
Yeah, because I
we'll
thought
see.
they were working on it, but don't take my word for it. I thought I read that, but I can't find the source, obviously. I'm pretty sure, but I guess it's just one of those things. I think that there's a lot of people that want it, so I think they're well aware of the need for it. For those that want that
Yeah,
feature.
it's just one of those things because it's a completely different code environment. It's not like there's a similarity in the Windows kernel and the Linux kernel, other than they're both
Yeah,
kernels.
yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Someone says, "Do you think net data is a sim?" Net data is not a sim at all. So that's a complete. It's just a monitoring tool.
Yep.
Very different things. Where do we want to first start on the questions here? What's the first one you want to
So
grab?
randomly, I will just let's see what. Oh, okay, the easy one. So, um, someone wrote in to let us know that a website that we previously recommended has changed the URL. So it was privacyguides.io, or no, privacytools.io was the old one, but it's privacyguides.org. So if you go on that website, if you want some recommendation on privacy respecting applications and things like that, they have recommended tools on that site. I haven't gone over every single one on that site because I've used the previous URL for a long time, but I just found out about the new name this morning right before we hit record. So I haven't like went through it, but if it's the same site and I took a quick browse and it looks pretty good. So if you want to just browse some recommended apps on that site, maybe it could give you some inspiration as far as some of the things that you could run, or maybe you could just kind of see what their opinion is based on something that you're using, because they have things like web browsers and service providers and different things that you can get into and the privacy implications of those apps and services.
Yeah. I seen the comment come up in the chat here. Is Nix OS on your radar at all, Jay? 'Cause it's not on
Yep,
mine.
it is.
Okay.
It absolutely is. It's just been some development hell on some projects lately that I need to get out the door, and after I get probably I think I decided I gotta get the next 10 videos out, and I could and I have these all recorded, so it's not like I have to record 10 videos. I just have to get the ones I've recorded out before I record something new or planned, but it is on my list, and it is I've heard some very interesting things about it, so I'm excited to check it out.
Yeah. So I think some of our friends have done videos on it, but so that means eventually it'll land itself in the home lab here
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of, new distributions come and go all the time. So
all the
sometimes
time.
there's a bit of a filter, but I think it's pretty clear that this one is at least going to be around a little while. I mean, we really don't know, but I think the excitement around the platform is at least telling me that it's healthy right now. So I'll check it out, see what I think, and I'm not sure what content in particular would come out of that, but I'm sure there's something there. So we'll have to see what I come up with.
Yep. I'll take the TrueNest one that just says feedback and question here. Now, this is let me see right here. Uh, I have a TrueNAS scale related question, and this question comes up a lot in the forums. This is a scale related question and couldn't figure out. We deployed an app and forgot to set up a host path for the database in the app. So the database now lives inside of the container. Is there a way to
Mm,
migrate the database in a container to get it over to the data set? That is very app dependent, but if
yep.
you can figure out where this is, because this is where people sometimes even set up Docker images, which essentially is what you're doing here, is you're setting up a Docker image and you didn't set the storage for Docker. So the data that you want stored somewhere is now stored within it. So when you update the Docker app, it can take all the data away with it. You have to try and figure out where those mount paths are and move or copy those files over to where they should be and then go back and update it. That's one option. Another option is, does that particular app have its own backup and restore? And some apps do. Like you can just export the entire config. Fresh RSS, for example,
Yep.
lets me export the config. So if I were to set up Fresh RSS improperly, I could export that config, reset it up properly, and then it would be blank, and then I would import my config, and that's like the fastest way to do it. It's just more tedious figuring out where those mount paths are and copying that data. But if you do
Yeah.
look inside of TrueNAS and you do like a ZFS list, now the web UI I believe hides this from you, but if you do a ZFS list from the command line, I think it gives you all the paths for all the mounted things.
Hmm.
It's because they hide it's all in the IX applications data set, and then it's all broke down underneath there. That's where they store all the data for all the other apps. And if you don't choose to use a host path because they give you the option where you can just let it be stored in there. The only time I use that, like let it be stored in there, is when I'm testing an app and I'm not going to be permanent. I'm like, hey, what does this look like if I spin it up? Why bother creating a host path for it? I'll let it create the data, because if I like the app, I delete it and then go through the setup procedure on it. So that's why they let you do that, which is kind of cool. But there's not an easy way. And if you look up, you'll find this tool called Heavy Script, and you'll find the documentation to be bad, and you'll find it really confusing. So do I. People have asked me to
Right.
do videos on it, and because TrueCharts uses this, and it's broken. Even the TrueCharts people don't have good documentation, so I just don't. My recommendation is not to use it. That's why I've been creating tutorials on how to properly set up the apps. I don't have tutorials because each app gets broken differently when you don't set it up properly. So it's too hard to try to show you how to get the apps for each one out. It's better for me just to
Yeah.
do them right. And I'm sorry if you have done them wrong, and you're just going to have to go through some of those challenges.
I completely agree. I mean, if you're lucky, the app will have an export database button in the UI somewhere. I mean, that's great, but you're still dealing with potentially having to convert SQLite to another database engine, for example, and that gets even more complicated. The other side of this too is that should you care? And I'm not trying to like, tell the person their question is not important. It's very important, but it's just like an alternate way of thinking. And maybe this person already thought about this, but performance obviously takes a hit if you don't have a decent database server. But then again, in the home lab, we don't have, hundreds or thousands of people using the app. we might be one person, or maybe someone in the several people in the family or in the home might use it. You're not going to notice the performance penalty because you're just a couple of people. It's not until you start scaling it up anyway. Like my Fresh RSS, I think it uses SQLite by default, if I'm not mistaken. I don't
Yeah.
notice any performance penalties. The database flat file is right there in the
Yep.
same data store inside TrueNAS. It's backed up. I can have different versions of it and everything. And I'm okay with that. You can argue it's more proper to have a proper database server, but at the end of the day, you have to think, is it worth it? Is it working okay now? Or perhaps someone wants to learn the process because they want to know how to convert one thing to another. And just like you said, it's always going to be app dependent. It's like it's pretty much the same as doing a lift and shift where you want to, transfer an app on a server to another server. It's like almost like the container version of that, but just the database, but it still has the complexity of a lift and shift. It's I wish there was, like you were saying, some kind of tried and true single thing you can do. There are some odd things that some people do that they swear by. For example, I've had people that subscribe to Microsoft Azure, not because they want to run VMs, not because they want to actually use it for production, but some people will use the database converter within Azure because I've heard that it's one of the best. So you can go from Postgres, MySQL, in all different directions. I can't personally vouch for it, but I know people that will literally just use Azure for that one thing. Even if they don't use that cloud, they'll have an account just for that one feature anytime they want to convert a database, which is pretty funny. But it could be something to look into if you are able to get like a flat file of the database and you want to
Yeah.
convert it and then do like a MySQL or import or something like that. Could be a possibility. But again, it's just what I've been told. I haven't vetted that myself yet.
Yeah. I'm going to jump on two more questions real quick here. This comes up a lot, and this is a challenge with the way podcast feeds work. We're aware that a lot of times it gets stuck at 99, and we got to goof with something in WordPress to make that work. They asked if we use Blueberry and WordPress to send the podcast out. So, yes, that's something we'll address and work on for those you that only get so many episodes back. That is a weird problem. It does all the forward episodes. It's the older ones that there's some quirkiness for the way the RSS feed works. And the second one is going to be, hello, I'm catching up on the show. Recently listened to an episode where you spoke about multiple SSIDs as a method of segregation. I've read that too many SSIDs can reduce performance. Is that true? If so, how much performance? That's going to depend on the Wi-Fi device. And it's usually not the SSIDs. It's the number of devices that get attached. Now, the newest version of Wi-Fi does a better job with this, but essentially was it called time division multiplexing? I didn't have the words pulled up on there. There's the time division multiplexing system that is used in Wi-Fi can suffer from waiting and round robining its way through all the different devices. When there's more devices, you can have some more slowdowns on there. So it's not necessarily that having two SSIDs may have an issue, but if you have 30, 40 devices spread across different SSIDs, you're going to have a slowdown. But the reality is, one of the reasons I don't do much Wi-Fi, speed testing, which I know people get excited about, is because it's so hard to measure on Wi-Fi because you're dealing with interference, you're dealing with different device types. We have found so many, and if you read through the updates for any Wi-Fi access point, it'll always be like found problem with insert name of phone. And that phone may even be a flagship phone where you have two phones sitting next to each other and one consistently gets faster speeds to the access point for reasons that are unknown. Chris from Crosstalk Solutions actually had covered this when we were talking about the one of the Wi-Fi devices me and him both reviewed, of how for some reason that Wi-Fi device doesn't, I think it was the iPhone it didn't like. And I had tested some Cisco equipment that actually died on me, which I thought was funny. That's why I never finished reviewing it, because one of the access points died. If you set it to WPA3, my Pixel 6 would not connect for reasons I don't know. Only my Pixel 6. My older phones and my Pixel 7 all connected, but the Pixel 6 wouldn't, and one of two Lenovo laptops, two different models, wouldn't connect. But swap it back to WPA2, it will. Wi-Fi can be quirky, and it can be speed and performance variations are a lot. It's one of the trickier parts on there, because as much as we have well-written standards, companies implementing those standards as well is kind of a challenge.
Yeah. I think the only thing more annoying than Wi-Fi is Bluetooth and DNS. Those are two things more annoying than
Yep.
Wi-Fi. I think those are the only two things I can think of that are more annoying than that is.
And I've seen the comment here in the live stream. Airtime fairness isn't always fair. You are correct. And trying to really break down what that is. If you want performance, you want speed, then you go hardline. I've never had the need for speed with Wi-Fi, and neither do any of our clients. Our clients always care about connectivity. So if you're trying to get the most speed, consider hardwiring. Like if you're looking for the lowest latency, best connection for playing games, you want to transfer files from your video editing rig like me and Jay do, you're going to want to focus on getting that thing hardlined in. That's the best, most effective way to do it.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I will hardwire anything that I possibly can. And it's especially painful when you do content creation, because if you want to, let's say, edit something on a laptop on your couch, then you're going to transfer the video file to it. And sometimes I'm on the couch and I forgot to grab the file, so I'll grab it over Wi-Fi, and then as I'm reminded, something. It is not even. It's like a 10 or 20 gig amount of files or something, and it just takes forever. But then, of course, when I'm wired in, it's super fast. And even if my Wi-Fi is running very well, I mean, there's all these fluctuations that could happen, like you said. It's just weird. It's just odd, to say the
Yep.
least. But
Exactly.
you just kind of keep adjusting things for your environment until you are annoyed as least as possible.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right. You got a couple questions you can answer.
I do, and one of which is more general, but we've had several comments that I've received by email that were made by people to this show, and also the Enterprise Linux Security Podcast, because we talked about Red Hat and all of these. So I'm going to try to address all the
We'll do a
comments.
blanket red hat thing.
Yeah, but the one thing I want to address is that this really odd thing where it's like someone will say, "You're wrong because actually it's this, this, this," which what they're saying is exactly what I said. I'm like, "What do we disagree with again?" I'm not sure because you're telling me exactly what I said, and sometimes I wonder if people don't hear the full argument. For example, someone wrote in and said, "Well, Red Hat has every right to do this," and I agreed. I mean, I literally said that it's their trademark, it's their distribution. They could do whatever they want with it, and I absolutely agree. And someone mentioned that the code is still available on. To paying customers and things like that. That the code is still available. It's just who it's available to that's different, which is what I said. Same thing. So I'm not really sure what the confusion is, but just to make sure that the point is accurately conveyed on my part, yes, Red Hat can do this. Yes, it's their trademark. Yes, they're a company and they can pivot to do whatever they feel they need to do to earn more profit. But our point has always been that despite they can do this, that it's caught what their negligence and impulsivity and lack of communication is causing damage to the industry. So it's
Yes.
less about can they do this. Yes, they can, but they just don't go about it in a responsible way, especially when they tell Alma Linux and Rocky Linux, you can continue to exist, you can continue to get the source code, and then they pull it, but they said that they could have access to it. So you never know when they say something, they're just going to randomly take it back. And enterprises, they can't rely on that. Okay, it's okay for a company to have a mistake every now and then or a miscommunication that happens. And yeah, companies can change direction, but when we have this many mess ups and communication failures in a short amount of time, if I was running an enterprise, I wouldn't be able to trust a company that says one thing and does another 1 month to the next. That's always been the problem here, and this unpredictability causes damage. And yes, the source code is available. It's just who it's available to, and specifically, they're trying to kill downstream distributions right after they said they can exist. So I just want to be clear that nobody is saying that Red Hat is doing something that they can't do here. It's not a matter of can they do this, it's a matter of should they do this, and are they throwing their own customers under the bus? I say yes,
Yep.
but I say the last thing I'll say in the on this though is yes, it's a complicated topic. We also literally said on the show, open source is hard. We had an episode that covered that. So there wouldn't be a debate if everything was 100% infallibly like wrong on one side, but there's gray areas here, which is why debates exist. But just make sure you're understanding the full argument and our full point before you write in, because I've received no fewer than probably 10 emails that made me wonder if anyone listened beyond the first minute. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, we already know Red Hat has plenty of lawyers, so
Right.
neither me nor Jay are lawyers, but I feel confident that Red Hat's lawyers reviewed this before doing it. So legally, I think they
Yep.
can do it. I feel confident in their legal team's ability to do that, but
Right.
morally, no, they shouldn't. So
And their legal team, they shoot down, including things like MP3 support and Fedora, and they're very, there's a video codec that was a target of this recently. So I don't think there's any question about the legal team looking into things, because they always err on the side of caution historically, to the point where if there was like a small percentage chance that something could backfire legally, they just don't do it. So the fact that they did this means one of two things. They made an impulsive decision that their lawyers didn't get a say in, which I absolutely doubt happened. Or B, they checked with their lawyers, and everything is fair, or not fair, but they can do it. And I think, just like you said, that yeah, I would be I think it'd be more shocking than the Red Hat announcement itself if the lawyers didn't look into this. There's just no way. They looked into it. They know. Yep,
yep.
absolutely.
Do you see the one that says LXD in the Homelab? So I'm going to read that one out.
Yes. Yep.
All right. I like to hear your thoughts on using LXD in the Homelab. Proxmox and XMB are my flavor at the moment, but LXD has some quite interesting features and might be something your audience is not so familiar with. Not entirely
Mhm.
bad choice for Homelab on fairly low spec PCs and hardware if you want to cluster some small form factor PCs maybe. Do you have any pros and cons of using LXD, use
I
cases, or
do.
management tools? What are
I
your thoughts
do.
on
And
that?
and they want you to say Lex D and Lex C, which I have a hard time making myself say that, because I don't pronounce things like just three letters anyway. But just throwing that out there. But I actually used Lex D in production before Proxmox, because at the time I had a very scrawny server. It had maybe 8 gigs of RAM, and maybe 4 cores. It was pretty weak. And I wanted to get the most out of it. So what I found is that I can only run a few virtual machines on that. But as soon as I switched it to doing everything in LexD, then I was able to just really get a lot more out of it, like run probably 3 or 4 times the number of containers versus virtual machines on the same hardware. So LexD is just to give people a bit of background. LexC Linux containers is a container. I mean, this predates Docker. Just to give you guys an example, and people that use Docker, they know that it's a layered approach. Every time you make a change, there's another layer. And if you delete the container, or not delete it, but you stop it or kill it and it has no more work to do, it dies, it's gone. And you have to engineer your own stateful method to keep your data. LexC is like a virtual machine approach to containerization, which is weird to say because Linux containers predates it, but I say it like that because I think it makes the most sense, because most people know Docker before Linux kernels. So by virtual machine approach, what I mean is you can get a MAC address, and that can get forwarded to your firewall or DHCP server, and you could treat it like a server. It's going to have the same MAC address every time. If you were to spin it up, save a file in your home directory, and stop the container, if you start it again, it's still going to be there because it's completely stateful by default. It's really really cool. I like LexC a lot. LexD is kind of like LexC with extra features. There's ZFS on top of it. You can have clusters. They add additional features that, and Canonical is the main. Now they're the actual steward of this, because it was fully open, and then they kind of just wanted to. I'm not saying it's not open now, but they just wanted full control over it, which it's their project, whatever they want to do. But you have to understand, Canonical pretty much owns this now. But they do add some good features here, and I think if you like ZFS, if you like to cluster things, I'm pretty sure that does migration too. And that this is different than what's in Proxmox, because Proxmox has LexC built in, and which is pretty awesome. It's just LexD has a bit more features added onto it. As far as pros and cons, really down to the application. If you're running like a simple web server, why not just make it a container? I mean, that's simple, right? If the app doesn't have a problem running in a container and you're constrained on space, it's absolutely a great way to go. It just depends on your use case. Another question I'll grab, someone in the chat room asked about the Homelab video that I put out this week, where I talk about my Homelab. And in that Homelab, I mentioned that I'm not running any containers in production. Now, one thing to keep in mind about my content is unless it's newsy, like something that just happened in the news, it's usually a month old when I put it out, because I have a queue where I record and it goes into a queue, and then the videos are prioritized, and they could be like a week old when I recorded them. I've had some like 4 months old before. I tried to get that one out because I wanted to get it as current as possible, but I think it was about a month old, because right after I put that video out, I started moving things into containers, into the Kubernetes stack. And I talked about it in a recent episode, like Smoke Ping is one, Uptime Kuma is another, Heimdall is another one I'm running. So I'm running a handful of containers in there now. So the next time I do a Homelab video, I'll probably, I think the next one is going to be more about Ansible, but sometime later I might revisit that and talk about the containers, because my Homelab keeps changing just like everyone else's. So it's just the content creation thing. Sometimes it's just a pipeline and there's a little bit of a delay, but as of today, yes, I am absolutely running containers in production.
Yep. Just so people know, because I seen this question was asked, and this is really recent news. I believe July 24th was when this was released, so you should have a patch by now. That is the Zenbleed, which is the similar to the was it Spectre Meltdown. It's in that kind of class of bugs where it's figuring out how to escape and get information out of past CPU boundaries. This is not an attack that is known in the wild, and I don't think to date, other than proof of concepts and academic research, I've not seen any infiltrations or exfiltrations, I should say, of data that have occurred exactly like as an attack vector. So it's still something to be concerned. There is a patch, so I wouldn't recommend not patching. I definitely
Right.
recommend staying patched on here. So I don't know how much I would worry about it. I would worry about things that you plan not to patch, and that's a bigger, broader problem. Like if there's patches available, you should have them loaded, and specifically because they've already released the microcode updates, because this can be fixed in software. Definitely do those patches, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why they're made available. And if you're worried about an update, bricking your install, then why don't you have snapshots? Get your snapshots implemented so you can go right back to right before you installed an update. So if there is an issue, you have something to go back to. But yeah, absolutely install your updates.
Yeah, it's like anything else. It's one of those things that makes a lot of news. Tavis Orbandy, the researcher at Project Zero Google, is damn amazing at finding bugs. That dude has found some of the most. Just read through everything Tavis Orbandy has done and scratch your head at how he figures it out. Because if there's the good news is he's working for the good guys. Tavis is a bug reporter. He does these incredible write ups, and they are works of art. Like you're scratching your head the esoteric things he's been able to find, and I'm just happy he's working for the good people. He does proper disclosure, contacts all the companies, goes through the full cycle of things. So it's not like this was found out in the wild, everyone was being attacked, and there's like, oh no, if you didn't patch, you were at risk for some period of time. I don't know anyone on the bad guy side that is quite as skilled as Tavis.
Yep, I totally
Which
agree.
is good. Do we want to jump on a topic of ad blocking on mobile devices?
Yeah, that was one of the ones I was going to talk about too, because it's one of the email feedbacks that we've received. And as a bit of a background, I hate smartphones. I just want to put that out there, because people get surprised when they find out that I run an iPhone, and I'm putting that out there. And the only reason I do is because I hate all smartphones. I hate Android and I hate Apple as well. I just dislike the iPhone maybe 1% less, so I kind of go that direction. I kind of feel like phones are a necessary evil. It's like people need to call me, but I hate looking at it, so it's complicated. So I never really cover phones much, but they do exist. And one of the things, and this is why this email struck a chord with me, is browsing the internet on smartphones is just horrible. Like, it's so different than on a
Yes.
computer, because you have auto playing videos that jump in front of you more often. You have focus breaks, and it's made worse by the fact that a lot of these browsers, where if you get a notification, you go off to another app, and then you go back to the browser, then it starts you back up at the beginning. Like right now, for example, I'm replaying Final Fantasy IV, so I have this little very short walkthrough on my browser. And every time I switch back to it, it starts back at the front. So I have to go keep scrolling, find out where I left off, so I can continue that part, and then deal with ads every single time it refreshes. And then ads will sometimes itself make it refresh, losing my place. I mean, phone browsing is I would almost
It's a
rather just
mess.
have a dentist do a root canal than deal with this. But the also, when you have Android and iPhone, there's different things that you can do as far as ad blocking DNS. It's one thing if you have Pi-hole at home and you're on Wi-Fi and it's going out that way, you're pretty good. But anytime I leave the house and I'm, away from my Pi-hole, I get all these ads. So what do? Do I just make my Pi-hole publicly accessible? Well, that's a bad idea, because then you have DNS man in the middle attacks that'll be, stupid easy to pull off against me. And we had a conversation about this last night, because it's it might be easier on one platform than another, and there's quirks in one versus the other. But it's kind of like a problem I really want to see solved, because it's to the point where I will sometimes just wait until I get home to look something up, because God forbid using a mobile browser. It's
Yeah, and
just
there's
so annoying.
I seen someone commented like you can load some of the extra browsers on there on like Android. I use Android, but I don't bother with the ad blocking on it because it just ends up breaking some things. One of the challenges is if you try to do it globally, first you got to make sure the phone's not trying to do DNS over HTTPS, which I believe is the default on modern Androids, but that can be varied by each individual device maker. May have some customization they put in. And then for me, I'm just using, the Pixel series, and I think there's some Chrome flags you have to set. But as someone who has a wife who plays clicker games a lot, if you go through all these settings and you do the favor of blocking ads, then you'll find out that these silly clicker games that she likes can't load anymore, because they say you've loaded an ad blocker. So until you disable your ad blocker, we can't load these games and these apps anymore. It's kind of a person case by case basis. It's not something I have a ton of experience in. I'm kind of with Jay. I just don't care for the browsing experience. We actually talked about pulling out like a Pine phone, or really,
Right.
I just prefer to use a small laptop to browse the web and use uBlock right in the browser to kind of solve my problems with it. That's been my kind of go-to. I wish there was a better answer, but the device lock-in that you get, the walled gardens they create are to really keep you as a captive audience. It is a really cat and mouse game. So it's not just you who might be looking for this and finding it difficult. There is, trust me, a lot about making this difficult being pushed by these large companies.
Yeah, someone in the chat room mentioned using like VPN to get to Pi-hole, and I mean, that's accurate. You could absolutely do
Yeah.
that. But what I find is that a lot of places are strangely hostile to VPN. Like they just think VPN is evil. Like going to like a fast food restaurant, trying to connect to OpenVPN, and it
Yep.
just won't connect. But then I leave the restaurant and it's fine. And some carriers block ports that other carriers don't. And then if you're using Wi-Fi at like a hotel, they're notorious for this crap, and they're also notorious for it being slow. So while that is a valid and clever workaround, it's there's some added frustration, because what do? Just make your VPN server run on 443? I mean, that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. But they don't block port 443 because that's part of the internet. I mean, you can do things like that, but see, that's the problem with mobile computing. Every time you have a solution that's valid like this one, then there's a complication in this realm that kind of makes it annoying when it normally shouldn't be. Even like if I wanted to just access my home server via port as 22, for example, it's going to be blocked or something like that. It's just and I know how to work around all these problems, but when you get to a point where you're constantly working around problems just to use your device, you start to hate it more than you already do. And if you are a system administrator, or you are one, then there comes a point where the phone is an anxiety device, because you're so wired to think like a server's down, that even if you're someone that loves smartphones, I'm telling you, after 10 years working as a sysadmin, you'll hate them as much as me. Even if you're like the biggest smartphone aficionado on the planet, sysadmin work will break you. It'll make you hate it. And I'm on the other side of that. And it's like, I still to this day think a server's down every time my phone goes off, even though that's not the case. So there is a little bit of bias I'll admit to here about why I hate smartphones, but it is a very chaotic and complicated and annoying, type of computer right now. And I think that we need more control to just be able to make sure that we don't see the things that we don't want to see. We should be able to do that. But, like you said, lock in, that kind of makes it hard.
Yep. Um, Homelab notifications. This is
Yep.
a good topic.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is going to be where there's different approaches to it. And a lot of services just like email. There's no doubt. And the good thing is you can usually find, and there's some I've talked before, like when I talked about doing notifications in PFSense, there's a couple different free email services out there that do, I think one is called MailHop. They have like a free tier that gets you like 100 emails a month. So as long as you're not getting more than 100 a month, you can stay under free tier. I think that's what it was, at least last I looked. But my solution, whenever possible, is I pipe all my log data, not for my business and my home lab. I just push it all into Graylog, and in Graylog, you can have different trigger notifications and different actions on that. Instead of email, I actually have Graylog sending things to Slack because I like Slack and I just happen to use it for business. But you can use webhooks to kind of alert however you want. And because you can have the trigger in Graylog, for example, I have XCP&G is a common one that actually doesn't have any native facility to do alerts, but I have certain things that will trigger an alert. And when those alerts are triggered, Graylog knows what to look for in the syslog and then will issue a trigger, for example, of a RAID array failing. I have a couple mirrored boot drives set up, and if one of those boot drives fails, it sends a notice via syslog that Graylog parses, and it's going to fire off a webhook to let me know that, hey, this particular server has got this particular message on it, and it'll actually send me the message as well. But you can have webhooks even tied into things like Home Assistant. This is
Yep.
something I might do as a project because you can do Home Assistant with webhooks, and I've used this for Synology talking to my Home Assistant. I think it'd be kind of fun to have a flashing red light that whenever one of the RAID systems or a TrueNAS system kicks an error, that Home Assistant turns on a red light. And I happen to have one of those red lights floating around somewhere at the office. So I could just put it on there. So it's like, if that red light's flashing, one of the servers has a real problem and I need to address it. So you can get clever with this and keep it all in-house and not use Slack. I just happen to use Slack because I'm in it all the time. I don't necessarily mean that other people are. So if you look at something like where do you want to land webhooks, Home Assistant, me and Jay have talked about this. I believe we've done an episode on the system. It's definitely easy to find a ton of information. It's one of the best self-hosted applications for home automation, and you can build automations based on webhooks. And so
Yep.
it's just kind of the path I went. Jay's going to talk about some of the other ways he has notifications set up.
Yeah, so the the first thing I tell everyone is to avoid email when you can, but the reality is there's no such thing as 100% avoiding it. And case in point, pretty much every modern application, most, not all, will have some kind of an API key where you could use some kind of, like you were mentioning Slack, you could just have the messages go out there. I like pushover for this. That's what I use for notifications to my phone. But the problem still is that some applications have no capability to send messages that way. Sure, you could, put something in the middle and work on that, but I think the person even mentioned they didn't want to run their own server just for this, which I get, because if you're running a home lab, you should run the things that interest you. You shouldn't feel forced to run something just because you have to, right? So I totally understand avoiding this, and good on this person for wanting to avoid setting up an email service, something that I don't think anyone should do anyway. But so what I do to solve that is I'll use pushover first. But for the edge cases, I forgot the name of the service because it's cheap and they just take a few dollars a month for it. But it's an outbound SMTP server. Off the top of my head, I mean, there's Mailgun, there's wasn't there something involving, oh, Mailchimp? I was going to say something with a monkey. What was that? Mailchimp.
Mailchimp's
Um,
for newsletters. That one's not.
yep.
I don't think there's any ways to connect to it. Mailgun has an API, and
Mhm.
you can do integrations with that. Matter of fact, I use Mailgun for my forums because it's an automated API call to send out mails for forum notices.
Yeah, that might be the one I'm using too. So sometimes you'll have a situation where the API is impossible and it really wants like an SMTP address and it won't accept anything else. In that case, a really good email outbound service will give you like an app password, not your account password. You generate an app password, you put that in the password field. You could have like one per service when you need it. I like to do it that way. Just pay for a very cheap outbound service. Better if you could find one free. But what I find is often the case is everything that I've used that's free all of a sudden isn't free, not that long after, and I end up paying more for it. So then I have to switch to something. So sometimes it's like if you can get it for just a couple of dollars, still they could change things and you might have to quit that service. But I think your chances are less likely that you have some support you can get. I mean, you're giving some money to them. Don't run your own email server. You could, if you wanted to, just create like a throwaway Gmail account. I'm not sure if they'll keep it open for you if you're not like using it normally, or if there's terms and conditions here. But there is a way to get an app password at Gmail and many of these other services, and you could just plug that in if you want to go that direction. So pushover is one of those things I use, but if there's a better one out there, I'm not saying that I use pushover because it's the best. Honestly, it's the first one that I found and it was affordable. If there's another solution that's fine, I might even consider it. But I think that's the direction I would go. Just use an outbound SMTP service and get pushover. Anytime an app supports or has an ability to hook into pushover, definitely go that direction, or whatever it is. It could be Slack, Mattermost, Rocket Chat, number of others, if you want to go that direction. But if for the ones that can't, just have a outbound Plan B email server to use, and I think that'll be what most people will need for that.
That'll work. And I think this is we'll answer a few of the questions back here real quick. Someone mentioned Security Onion. I just wanted to say that was episode 42. We did cover it. I think it's an awesome project. One more question someone had, and I know it was recently done by Network Chuck, is Wazoo. Wazoo is a cool project. I haven't had time to use it in a number of years. It's a fork of OSEC. OSEC was always really tricky to set up, and I just never got around to doing a video on it. Wazoo is a fork done by Elastic, and they've made it a little bit easier. I think it's a great security product as well. That question was from up earlier. So if there are a couple projects you're looking to start with, hey, definitely Security Onion and Wazoo are fun to play with, and you can integrate Wazoo into Security Onion as a feed.
Yep. And someone mentioned that setting up SMTP and Proxmox is hard. And I just want to say, yes, that is true. It is weird because I find Proxmox is very easy to use and clever. The UI, I have a lot of great things to say about it, but I'm going to throw it under the bus. Their email system sucks. Like you literally have to go on the command line, and not that this scares many of us, right? Because we love the command line, but some of us don't want to mess with email. And with Proxmox, you kind of have to. And the reason why I didn't mention Proxmox is because I automated that years ago, like setting up the SMTP out and all that. So I never think about it. I literally just throw my automation system at it, or actually I just throw the config files on it, and then it's fine. But I really do want Proxmox. I want them to put something in the GUI for people that prefer that method to be able to plug in their SMTP information, or at least an API key would be even better. But that's like one thing that I think Proxmox really should do a better job on, because it's strange that they figured everything out except for that. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you kind of have that same challenge with XCPNG because they'll go further. They don't even have an option other than if there's nothing. You can do what you want on the back end because it's Linux, but there's not a facility built into it. So you can build your own monitoring. You can export your syslog. Now, even through their UI, you're able to just take syslog and pipe it somewhere. So my answer is Graylog, because I send everything to Graylog. Graylog is my go-to place. That way, all my notifications come from one thing, and then I have Uptime Kuma. The only thing not in Graylog is Uptime Kuma, and Uptime Kuma keeps an eye on Graylog. So if Graylog goes down, I know Graylog goes down. Uptime Kuma actually monitors a lot more than just Graylog, but that's my secondary of, hey, Tom, how would you know if Graylog went down?
Exactly. And I've had situations where, you have to watch the watcher, and if you don't, something silently fails. It's
Gotta watch the
definitely
watcher.
happened. And yeah, total agreement on that. It's probably an episode in and of itself to kind of just talk about the messaging chain, because sometimes, I wish I had an answer like just do this one thing on all your apps and it's fine, but every app wants the data separately. Even worse, you have Let's Encrypt built into all these, but not all of them support the same DNS checkers than others. So you might be using a service that allows you to validate Let's Encrypt easily on one, and then another doesn't even have that built in, and then you have to go in the command line. And there's a few rough edges here that are kind of curious to me that they still exist when everything else was made easy. But if any developer is listening and they have some spare time and want to contribute something to Proxmox or whatever, I mean, this might be something to look into.
Yep. All right, this is I think the last question we have here is, hey, Tom and Jay, I have a question for the upcoming Q&A episode. I have multiple VMs in the cloud, a few at home, all run Debian-based distros. Good for you, run Debian. Or Debian. From time to time, SSH and each of them check the logs, upgrade packages. The base is provisioned via Ansible, but I still do upgrades manually. I'm looking for a tool that gives me a single management interface for all the Linux servers. The closest I found is the Cockpit project, but it runs each host independently, which is significantly better than the SSH way. Do you have any tool or how you would optimize each regular maintenance operations? My short
Mhm.
answer is you could technically do this with Zabbix and have it monitoring everything and letting you know what the status of those servers is. But I think Jay's answer is probably going to be a little bit better of you have the systems all auto patching themselves.
Yes, unattended upgrades is something I install, and there's something like that for other distros. But since this individual is also using Debian, I just have a template in Ansible for the config files for unattended upgrades, so they're fed in via that. And then I have variables in the config file for the email address and the information, so that way, someone can get a hold of my template. It's fine. It doesn't have my actual email or any credentials in there, but it has placeholders, as you'll see. And it's a really good system because then Ansible is going to make sure that every machine has that. And then you'll get alerts from unattended upgrades itself that the updates ran. I'm trying to remember the name of that. I haven't used it myself yet, but someone in our circle used this for Ansible and did a couple of videos. It is right there in the web browser. It wasn't AWX or Ansible Tower. It was something relatively new that's getting a lot of buzz right now that I want to
Oh,
look
yeah.
into. I can't remember the name of it though. Is it Semaphore? I think it is.
Yeah, I think I'll look it up while because the other thing is,
I think
you
it's
are also
Semaphore.
running Ansible. You have the system checking for changes. That way, if you push a change in Ansible, all the systems you built with it, how often do they check in?
So yeah, that would be the internal Ansible solution. So basically the way it works is that I have a variable that depending on how important the machine is, the variable might be 5, it might be 15, it might be 30. And that's how many minutes it checks in, basically. So if it's super important, it checks in every 5 minutes. If it's not really all that important, I'm not wasting traffic. And the way that I set it up is I use Ansible pull because I feel that Ansible pull is far superior than normal Ansible, and I won't even use normal Ansible. That's how much more superior I think it is. But I also, it allows me to do some things like create a system D unit that handles the check-in. So the system D unit, a system D timer goes off, whatever that value is, and then it checks in. But what happens if it fails? Well, I get an alert, but not only that, I have it set up to schedule itself to run again like an hour later, just in case there's like a temporary 404 in a Debian repository or something. So if I get a failure, I just kind of I look at it, but I don't really get concerned. And then because it's going to try again, and if it fails the second time, I got to go in there and look at it. And then I have healthchecks.io that gets pinged every time a server runs. So if a server doesn't run or is silently failing, then healthchecks.io will email me and say, hey, this server hasn't checked in a week. You need to kind of go look at that. So that kind of helps me find any machines that might be kind of stuck on something, which doesn't really happen often. But I have a lot of a lot of things built in. Like, for example, when I boot a machine, it won't even check in to Ansible for 45 minutes because if I needed to like pull some data off a machine, a machine that was decommissioned, the last thing I want to do is have to contend with an Ansible run while I'm just trying to get data off of it. So I have logic in there for that. It's just going to run 45 minutes after it boots, but then after that, it runs the number of minutes that it's configured for. So there's a lot of intelligence that I built around this. Like it even knows when itself is running, so it doesn't run against itself. It creates a lock file. Like, oh, you're already running a job, so no, you're not running
Yeah.
two. So that's going to stop it from tripping on itself, especially if a provision runs so long that the timer goes off again. I have that logic built into it. And there's just so many things that I know I'm probably forgetting something like really cool, but basically I built all that logic in with Ansible pull, and I feel like Ansible pull gave me the ability to customize all of this. Ansible normally is run from the server toward the machines, and if you're doing that, you might want to look into Semaphore.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does look like that's the name of
Yeah,
it. Yep.
Semaphore Ansible. Christian Lempa, That Digital
Yep.
Life. He's done a video on it. He's a friend of ours, friend of the
Yep.
channel. Does
Awesome
some
dude.
awesome
Yep.
person. Really like him. By the
Hmm.
way, he one of his things about YouTube is he mostly speaks German. He's not the best English speaker when he started, and YouTube was a way for one to share his passion in technology, also so he could become a better English speaker. And I'm impressed. Like when we have conversations with him, because neither me nor Jay speak German, he's just super. He's really articulate. It's
I'm just sitting here trying to learn different programming languages fluently,
and
and this guy is
he
just doing
speaks
all this
English
tech
great.
stuff, and he's multilingual on top of it. It's like, oh my gosh. So yeah, that is right. He did do a video on that.
Yep.
So that would be the direction I would. Now, granted, I haven't used it yet, but I feel strongly enough about his recommendation that if
Oh
he's
yeah.
recommending this, that I have no problem recommending it based on his recommendation of it. I will probably do a video on it myself at some point, but right
It's a
now,
pretty
yeah,
slick system for managing Ansible.
yep,
So
absolutely.
hopefully it answers the question. Do we have any more,
And
Jay? Did we cover them
well,
all?
the last thing I'll mention is I will be releasing my Ansible solution publicly. So if you want to see what the heck
Awesome.
I'm talking about, I don't have an ETA. I have some checks and balances to go through. I'm going to basically make it a public mirrored repository. So my internal solution will mirror to the public one. So when I make a change internal, you'll see it in the public as well. And then it'll also have a video and some documentation that'll tell you how it works. It won't be like you could just drop this in your home lab and it'll work. There's going to be some things that you will need to change, and it'll be in the documentation. And part of the fun is getting it to work in your environment. You wouldn't run it on production, but if you're curious how I do things, you want code samples, you want to know how the chain is set up, how I check this, how I check that, how the system D thing works along with Ansible. All of that will be in the video, and you'll be able to download that repository yourself and just hack away at it. So if you're curious how I do it, you will be able to find out. I don't know how soon. It could be a week, it could be 2 months, but it's called NodeForge. That's the internal name that I call this solution. So if you see a video that references that, then that's the one that I'm talking about, and that's going to have it in there. So definitely wait for that.
I don't know if you have an answer for this. I know I don't at all. PVE, and I'm assuming that's Proxmox virtualization version 8.
Virtual environment. That's
Yeah,
the
virtual environment.
official product name because they make a mail gateway and some other things too.
Yeah. Network card changing names every time changing order every time it reboots. I don't experience that in XCP-ng. How do you deal with that in Proxmox?
So there, you shouldn't have to. If you have this problem, that means something else is broken. By design, Proxmox doesn't have this problem. I've ran it on countless machines, installed it, reinstalled it to do tutorials, for example, and I've never once had this problem. This was a classic Linux problem altogether, where you would have, and they mentioned this, the persistent rules file, which would be created because you'd get like a identifier for the network card, and it would map it to ETH0, ETH1, and so on. But then later on, they switched to the new naming scheme, which is going to be based on the position of the network card on the bus. So if the name is changing, and the weird thing about this is that it, according to the what the person said, it's changing from the new format, which could be ENP, a longer name that's kind of generated based on location, to like the standard ETH0 and then back again. That tells me that either something is configured to tell it to not use the actual naming, because persistent rules, that file should not be necessary anymore today in 2023 on any distro. You should not need to touch it. They have this figured out. So there's something in there that's maybe deconfiguring it or putting it back to the old way or flipping it back. There's another ingredient here, because by design out of the box, Proxmox, it just doesn't have that problem. So
Yeah.
I
Thing is,
wish
now
I
they
knew
say it
more. Without
wasn't doing
looking at
this
the
in
system, it's
7.
hard to say.
Yeah, they said it wasn't doing this in 7. It happened after to 8. As a non-Proxmox user, I don't know, but maybe they introduced there's a bug somewhere, is a
That could
guess.
be. Now my question then would become, was Proxmox 8 a full install, or was it an upgrade? I could tell you that I upgraded to it. I didn't do a clean install. I've been writing the entire 7 series into 8, so I did an in-place upgrade throughout. If there is a bug, maybe if you install it fresh, you could experience the bug, but maybe I don't experience it because a config that is proper kind of stuck around and maybe only new people get it. All of this is just guesstimates and in theory on my part. It's odd, it's not normal. It's just really hard to say. Like sometimes I just wish I could just get these machines in front of me because I really want to know what it is now, right? But without having physical access to it, it's really hard to find out. And sometimes people just need another set of eyes, and that's something we run into all the time. We know our systems backwards and forwards. We're going to filter out some things that someone else may not filter out if they were to look at it. And there's been plenty of times where you, Tom, have pointed out the obvious to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. So there's just so many different things, but I would be really willing. I'd want to know about more about this because even though I'm saying I don't have this problem, you never have a problem until you do, and it's always possible that this could be a big problem, and this individual is the first one to mention it. So maybe this is something that'll affect more people, and I need to know about it. Maybe it's a situational thing, but either way, that would be a very annoying thing to have to deal with.
Yep. All right. Well, this wraps this up. Thank you for all the questions you sent in. This is one of the things me and Jay were waiting a long time for, and we're kind of excited to see all the questions that come in now. So we love doing these Q&A episodes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Definitely a lot of fun. But see you all next week. We definitely have some more things planned. We're trying to figure out which one. We were doing our list and going, wow, we got a lot of things to talk about. So
we really do. Yeah, there's so many things we want to talk about. Send us episode ideas too, because I sometimes when I come up with an idea for the show, I'm like, why didn't I think of that sooner? That's just too obvious. That should have been within the first 12 episodes or something. So I think there's definitely some missing pieces here we need to kind of round the edges on. So
absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.